For the first time in decades, Cuban people en masse are rising up against the authoritarian communist regime and demanding freedom. And they're being jailed for it and probably shot for it, like every other communist regime has done. They are sick and tired of having no food and no health care, although those things presumably or are supposed to be provided by the government. They clearly are not, and people are rising up against this. And their symbol of freedom, the American flag. Many people in America don't like that. And we're going to talk about why and what this has to do with us. Who cares about Cuba, right? What does Cuba have to do with us here in America? Well, probably more than you think. And we're going to talk about some of that today. My name is Matt. Welcome to Church Public. Let's get started. Again, my name is Matt. Thank you so much for joining us here at Church Public today. We will be talking about Cuba and some other things that are going on in America because I want you to be prepared. I want you to be educated on what is going on in this country, specifically with an eye towards how to live as a Christian. How do you exist in this worldview and not hide away in your house or in a church and not address anything that's going on, but also not become like this world? Those are the two dangers. The danger of just going away and being completely detached from reality, which is not what we are called to do according to Jesus and his command of love one another and his command of go and make disciples of all nations. And we're also not supposed to look like this world. Jesus was very clear about that, in the world but not of the world. Paul had lots to say about looking like the world and how we are supposed to be different in the way that we live and act and do everything in our lives. So how do we do that? That's what we try to look at here every time. So today we're looking at Cuba, of all places, because things are happening in Cuba, and they're things that not maybe directly affect you, but they're things that give us a window into potentially where we could go, potentially where other people have been before. Again, it has been said, and I'll continue to say, if you don't know your history, you are doomed to repeat it. And we're in this weird situation where not only do people not know their history because maybe they don't teach it in school anymore, I have no idea, and people don't know their Bible. So I want to combine both of those things. We need to know what's in the Bible and we need to know what's in history so that we can be better than others who have gone before and learn from them. Like, what a great thing. That's why the book of Proverbs is such a great source of wisdom and inspiration, because a really smart guy named Solomon, who wrote most of it a long time ago, gives us a window into some things that we can do well. And every book of the Bible I could say that about. There's so much good that obviously it's scripture and it's God's word. Yes, but it also is practically applicable to your life today, and we need to continue to look at that. So what I want to start with, and actually I think this is an interesting place to start. Hopefully you can appreciate this, because some of you may have been around in the 50s, early 50s. Some of you may have started their life's journey a little after that, like I did. But to look back to where Cuba and this regime began, I think is informative for where we are today. And I'm going to play something for you. And if you're not watching, you can go and check out churchpublic.com. You can go to YouTube and search Church Public as one word and find these videos, either place there. But I'm going to play a video of Castro talking about how he is specifically not a communist. Now, we have now lived these past 50 some years, 60 plus years now, and he clearly was a communist, and he clearly was an oppressive, authoritative dictator. And the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. Like, you can see what has happened in Cuba, and then today, over the weekend even, and through today, you can see people who are rising up against this communist dictator. And obviously he is gone now, but the authoritarian regime continues. So I just think it's interesting that this dictator, as he was rising to power and convincing people that he was just a regular guy, for the people guy, this is what he said.
The world watched what was believed to be a popular uprising of the people.
There is not communism or Marxism in our ideas. Our political philosophy is representative democracy and social justice in a well-planned economy.
All right, again, I know that was a little bit hard to hear, so I'm going to read it for you. And again, some of the language is a little bit, it's not quite English, so I'm just going to not translate that for you, but I'm just going to help you understand what he said. He said, there is not communist or Marxist in our ideas. In other words, there's not communism or Marxism in his ideas. He goes on to say, our political philosophy is representative democracy and, did you hear him say it? Social justice. Again, many of us think that social justice is this new idea, this new way of thinking about the world that's going to lead to this amazing utopia and this heaven on earth. It's not new. He wasn't even the first to begin this. If you go and read some of Marx, before Marx, if you read some of Hegel, this goes back and back and back really far. This idea of justice that is not the biblical concept of justice, the blind concept of justice that some of our founders envisioned, but instead is this social justice in, as Castro says, a well-planned economy. What that translated to was, I, the leader, will tell you what justice is, and I will plan your economy. Very clearly, that's what it ended up being, and very, very clearly, it was Marxist. It was communist. There is it's not, I can't even say it's a funny saying, it's an unfortunate saying that Christians go to heaven and socialists go to communism. And unfortunately, in every case, that's just been true. And unfortunately, the sad joke in there is that communism, in a lot of senses, is likened to this hell on earth. It's terrible. If you don't have to take my word for it. Don't believe me. Look at the protests that are happening in Cuba right now, this second. It's not going well for them. There is no world in which you say that Marxist, socialist, communist policy led to this heaven on earth. That is very, very far from it. The people that disagree with this, I just don't know what reality they're looking at because I don't see it. At any rate, this is what's happening in Cuba right now. And the reason this is important is we're talking about freedom, and we're talking about what it means to live in prosperity. I've done a lot of sessions about the founding fathers and the different philosophy, very different from communism, very different from Marxism. And we've talked very specifically, and again, you don't have to believe me. You can go read the founding documents. You can go read the life stories, the biographies of those that led the founding of America. You can read John Locke, the philosopher that inspired a lot of this. And again, I'm not going to go through all of those things here today, but the ideas of freedom, of liberty, of, as Jefferson put it, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, the things that were recapitulated into the pledge, liberty and justice for all. Again, we could go through the Declaration, the Constitution, supporting documents, Bill of Rights, all these other things that the founders believed based on Christianity, based on at least a Judeo-Christian version of God, that every person has value. And even though at the time it was clear we did not live up to that value, we've spent 250 years trying to live up to that value. So the two paths are: figure out what the best way is, try to move towards that, or burn it all down. That's really it. That's the simplest way I can put it. Socialism and Marxism and communism seek to burn it all down and replace it with this idea that gives you social justice with economic policy. And how that plays out, you can see in Russia, China, Cuba, Venezuela. I could go on and on. That's how it plays out every time in real life. It sounds like a great thing. It sounds so ideal. It sounds so amazing. Sure, that everybody is the same and everybody has everything they need. And actually, that sounds a lot like how heaven is going to be. Not surprisingly, because there's this part of every human that wants to live in this heavenly place. Of course there is. That's absolutely true. The problem is, not according to me, according to Jesus, the Son of God, the Savior, God himself, we can't have that on earth. There's too much sin in the world because we make too many mistakes, because, as Paul puts in Romans, we all sin and fall short of this glory, this ideal, this holiness of God. We all miss it. We can't do it on our own, which is why we need Jesus. That's the gospel. The gospel of Marxism, the gospel of socialism and communism, which are all part of this same conglomerate, is that if we remove the bad parts of power, the bad parts of the system, all of these bad people who oppose it, specifically Christians, I'll read you a quote from Marx in a moment about how much he likes Christians. Once you remove those, then you can have the heaven on earth. And unfortunately, as believers, we know that's just not true. It's just not true. Here's the interesting part about Cuba right now. The symbol they are using, not me, not us, not Americans, the symbol the Cuban people are using for freedom as they're chanting libertad, freedom, in their country right now, trying to please ask the government there, let us have freedom. The symbol they're using is the American flag, because they know, and many people for a couple hundred years now have known, the symbol of the American flag stands for these ideals, these principles based on the Bible, based on Christian values, based on the Ten Commandments of freedom and justice for all. Now, in America, now I won't say we, because I'm not including myself in that. There are people in America who don't believe that anymore. And you've seen that over the 4th of July. You've seen that in people condemning the flag. You've seen that in people not wanting to stand for the national anthem and kneeling and all these other things, because they no longer believe that America is a place of freedom. I won't even take time to draw the comparison. You can if you want to, between, for instance, an American sports game versus the people in Cuba right now, and who has more in terms of resources. You can make that comparison yourself. The question is, are we really living up to our values now, or are people trying to change those values? And quite clearly, people are trying to change those values. So an interesting point that I think to cover about Cuba is, what about the people? There have been people, and this has been happening for 50 years, so this is not new, but people who have built rafts trying to come over here from Cuba. This is, again, has been happening forever, because for decades and decades and decades, Cuba has been communist and people have been trying to get here. And there are a lot of refugees from Cuba here in America today who know the horrors of communism firsthand. They know these things. There are a lot of people, first, second, multiple generations of people from Cuba who have survived, literally just survived. The administration of America currently has said they will not, full stop, will not let in people from Cuba. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that weird? I feel like that's weird. And I feel like it's weird in terms of a double standard. And many would say, like, if you don't have double standards, you don't have any standards. That's not a great prescription here. But I do want to draw the standard, the comparison of saying we're not letting any people in from Cuba. I mean, go look up all the news stories. It's all over the news. The administration will not let people in from Cuba. And yet, we are letting legitimately hundreds of thousands of people every month in from other countries through the southern border. Hundreds of thousands. There was a study that just came out asking people to estimate how many people were coming over from the southern border. Many people thought it was a couple thousand, 5,000, 10,000. No. In May alone, hold on, I have a number here for you here. Let me get this number. This is an important number. In May alone, according to U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, 180,000 people came across the border, and that's just the ones we know about. So the number's probably higher. That's just May. In just this year to today, there have been almost 1 million people across the border. 1 million people coming across the southern border. That's more. We're almost to the point. Not quite. I did check the number. We're almost to the point of all of 2019 already, and we're not even. Well, I guess we're barely now through half the year. So, why is this administration letting people in from any country and not checking what country they're from necessarily, and just letting people in? And in other words, it's really not stopping people, right? Because we're not letting people in. This is not an immigration process. This is just holes in the border and people just streaming across. Some of them are caught, some of them are not. And why are you not intentionally, forcefully saying you may not come in from Cuba? Why would that be? The only reason I can think of is people who have actually lived in communist countries know socialism, social justice, as we just heard Castro say himself. The communist dictator of Cuba said he's all for social justice. Does that sound like a familiar phrase? You could take Castro's name off that and read it for many of the people that are in America today proposing these things. And that was several decades ago. The people from Cuba know socialism, communism, social justice, and they know these policies only lead to their pain and suffering for the average person. They know that's how it is. The people from these communist countries, and unfortunately, this just leads to voting. And I know this may sound like a stretch to you, but this is all connected. It's clearly all connected. I don't see how this could not be connected. Why do you let 1 million people into the country illegally? It's illegal because they didn't immigrate. And I am married to a person who immigrated legally through the process. I helped her go through the process. I went to, not helped her in terms of cheating. I mean, I was there with her, and I watched this process happen, and it wasn't terribly difficult. And we saw people from every country I can imagine go through this. People are going through the legal process, fine. But this is 1 million people who did not go through the process just this year. And yet, people from Cuba cannot come. I cannot think of a reason that would be other than the people who come here with the idea that this is going to bring prosperity without the baggage of communism will vote for those that are in power currently. Vote for leftists, vote for Democrats. The people that come from Cuba, come from communist dictatorships, they don't, this is just statistically, they don't vote for Democrats because they know what these policies lead to. They have lived through them. And again, barely sometimes survived through them. Again, here's a funny thing. Just go and look up, if you want to do a quick search, look up the rafts, like the floating rafts that people have strung together over the years. There's many examples of this. Floating rafts of people that escaped from Cuba and made it to our mainland here, Florida or wherever, Gulf Coast. And look up the people that have built rafts escaping capitalism because capitalism is so bad. Sorry, it's kind of a trick question. No one has built a raft to escape capitalism anywhere in the world ever in the history of the world. It hasn't happened because people are not escaping capitalism on a raft because the dictator is so bad that he will kill you if you don't escape. But that happens in communism, in all communism, all the time. So we're back to voting. I think this is about voting. I think this is about who's going to vote for those in power and who's going to vote based on what they know to be true. Again, it's about voting for an ideology that they want to be true. And to be fair, sounds good. It sounds great to have a heaven on earth. I would love if that were actually a thing. Unfortunately, I read this Bible and I don't see that in here. I see the kingdom has begun. Jesus began the kingdom on earth. And we as believers have a lot of work to do. And the kingdom will be finished when heaven and Jesus return. There's no heaven on earth. So this is about voting. Do you vote for the policies that sound good, or do you vote for reality and real things and what works in reality? And that's just a hard pill, I guess, for some to swallow. So to bring it to more local news, there is a dispute over a voting bill in Texas. This is rather strange, rather interesting, but there is a dispute over voting in Texas. The Democratic legislators in Texas, rather than showing up, which was their obligated duty, when they signed up for the job, they were obligated to go to their job. Most people, if you have a job, you're supposed to show up for your job. These people were supposed to show up for the job. Instead of showing up for their job, they got on a private jet and left town. I think I have a picture of that here. This is a picture of them on the jet plane, smiley and happy, leaving for Washington, D.C. to not vote on this voting bill in Texas. So, a couple things going on here. They had to get on a plane and leave because if they were in the state, they would be forcibly compelled to go to their job. And rightly so. They signed up to do a job. They decided not to do their job, so the police can actually go and pick them up and say, hey, you're supposed to show up for this vote. You need to show up for this vote, unless, you're sick or dying, whatever, fine. But your job is to do this. So they left the state so they didn't have to do their job. Now they're saying that this is because the bill represents the 2021, the new Jim Crow. Biden himself said, quote, the assault on free and fair elections is just such a threat. This is continuing on with his quote. This Biden says, literally, I've said it before, we are facing the most significant test of our democracy since the Civil War. It is not hyperbole, since the Civil War, end quote. So this is Biden saying, this has literally been the biggest test to democracy since the Civil War. I would interject, I'll just start at the First World War. That was bad. The Second World War, where Nazis wanted to control the whole world and take over America, that was pretty bad. 9/11 was pretty bad, where they wanted to destroy America from the inside. I'm not even going to keep going. I'm just going to stop there. Is a voting bill the worst threat to democracy since the Civil War? And, okay, so you're asking, what's in the Texas bill? What's in this voting bill? Is it that bad? Is it saying specifically people of certain races or minorities or genders or anything can't vote? No, you can go read it. You can go read the bill. It doesn't say any of those things. Here's some things it does do. It says if you didn't ask for a mail-in ballot, you don't get one. Apparently that's terrible. Now, let me just say, this is to avoid fraud. Why? Because if you get a mail ballot and you didn't ask for one, what happens if you moved? What happens if, God forbid, you're dead, but they still send you a ballot? What if someone of ill repute decides to cast a ballot for you? Terrible, right? And having lived in California, where they mailed ballots to everyone, whether or not they asked, I can say personally, I received, I think, 3 ballots. 3, personally. And I am an honest person, so I only voted once. What if I was not an honest person? Were there any not honest people in California? I don't know. I'm just going to leave it there. But what if I moved, which I did? What if I were dead and I still got a ballot and someone decided to vote for me? How are you going to stop that if you just send everybody mail-in ballots who didn't ask for them? What if does this bill abolish the idea that if you ask for a mail-in ballot, you can get it? No, you can still get one. You just have to ask for it. Okay, so that doesn't sound so terrible to me. Then it says, oh no, if you don't have an ID, you cannot vote. I am sorry. This one I just struggle with. I have a 15-year-old who has an ID. If you are saying that, this is not me, if you are saying that poor people or minorities are unable to get ID, if you are saying they're not smart enough to do that, there's something wrong with you. I know all kinds of people, and they're all smart. And if there was a person who needed assistance getting an ID, I'm sure they could. In fact, there are whole departments of the government to help people with this and to help people register to vote. I just moved to this new state. I cannot tell you how many pieces of mail, how many emails, how many phone calls I have received in the 4 months that I've been here to get me to vote. I mean, so many, countless. I couldn't even count them. So many things to try to get me to vote. And I didn't ask for any of those things. They just want you to vote that badly. And if you're saying somebody's not smart enough for that, there's something wrong with you. You are a bad person if you are saying that people can't figure this out, or there aren't people out there willing to help them figure out. I don't know how else to say it. Sure, some people struggle with doing certain things, but you're generalizing the entire population of a state is not able to do this. That's a terrible statement. That is just a hateful statement. I can't believe people believe this and project this onto an entire state. This is terrible. And so it can't possibly that you think people are that stupid. It can't be that. It can't, right? I mean, I have to think the benefit of the doubt. You can't possibly think people are that bad, but I mean, maybe they do. I don't know. So the only thing I can think of is they're so opposed to you having an ID when you vote because they want people to vote that don't have an ID. I mean, that seems, again, it's this idea, this philosophical idea that if you eliminate all of the possibilities that are impossible, whatever you're left with, however strange, is usually the reality. So if it's none of these other things, then the whole idea about ID, or not having one to vote, must mean you want people who don't have an ID to vote. That's the only conclusion I can come to. And then we look back at Cuba, and then we look back at the almost 1 million people that we know about who just came into America this year, not to mention the millions who are already here that are not necessarily legally here. So is it that you want them to vote and you're terrified that they're not going to be able to vote if they don't have an ID because they're not here legally? I mean, this is the only thing that I can think of. And I combine that with this hard pushback against those coming from Cuba. Why would you not want people from Cuba to vote? Like, those are the people we should be helping. They literally are getting killed for waving the American flag and saying, please, please, please give us freedom. And they're getting killed for it. They're so persecuted that they're making these rafts. Many people die on the rafts trying to come to America. And you're saying, no, you cannot come. But the other million people, no problem. Like, this is ludicrous to me. It's just insane. I mean, perhaps, this is just my opinion, I think it's because Democrats know people from communist regimes will not vote for socialist communist policies because they have actually lived through them. And we are seeing today the response of decades and decades of communist rule. You can see it. Just look at it. Look on the TV. Turn on the TV. Look at this protest that's going on right now. People, we need to get our priorities straight. These Democrat politicians from Texas left on a private plane, which was against the law. Yeah, it was against the law. They were obligated by contract, because that was their job, to go and vote. And they knew that because they don't have a majority, they would not win and this vote would go through. And it will go through. That's the thing. It's just delaying, and they're just becoming virtue signalers, saying that we're against this thing because that's what they're against. And there's no evidence that this is rooted in racism or anything else. So show me a person who cannot figure out how to get an ID, and I'll help them get an ID. Show me a person. I mean, here's a great example. There were, this last election cycle, more minorities of everything who voted than ever before in the history of America. There were more. You can go look at the numbers. There were more in every category. And the only category, actually, of people that went down in this last election were white males. Go look at the statistics. Every other category of person, which I am not in favor of categories of person, but this is the language that they make you use now, went up. So you are telling me that they're not smart enough to go and get an ID? Like, ludicrous. It's ridiculous and hateful. It's honestly hateful. It's just a hateful thing to say. I don't know how else to say it. Like, you people are driving me nuts. So we need to stand up for freedom and stand up for the right things. On a side note, I am speaking at a church in Pennsylvania this weekend, and I have to get on a plane. This is a side note, but it's slightly connected, so I just want to put it out there. On a side note, I'm speaking at a church in Pennsylvania this weekend, and I have to get a plane, and I have been told by the airlines that I must wear a mask for the whole time. This is regardless of vaccination status. It doesn't matter. You must wear a mask on the plane the whole time. And you all have probably seen all the people getting kicked off planes, 2-year-olds getting kicked off planes for not wearing masks right, all these things, getting put on no-fly lists for not wearing masks right because you're a terrorist now if you don't wear a mask, all these things, regardless of vaccination status. So I just want to show you again, this is a picture of our Texas Democrats leaving their responsibilities to go and avoid the vote on a private plane. And just to point out here, I don't see any masks on any of them. Why would that be? Why would there be no masks on these people? Why are they more special than you and I are? Like, one of these things is wrong. And that's what it is. I think they believe that they are more special. They believe they can tell you how to live, you how to vote, whether or not you can go to church, whether or not you can go to work, whether or not your business is open, even whether or not you need to cover your face. But you silly little people are too dumb to know how to get an ID, if you should cover your face, how to make a photocopy. These people believe that they are better than you. They want the power to rule over you. Throughout history, we have seen people like this. We have seen in every instance, it does not end well for you and me. The only saving grace we have is literally the saving grace of Jesus. And all of this matters because truth matters. In this country at the moment, we still have some freedoms. I'm going to use my freedoms. I think you should use your freedoms. We need to use our voices to stand for freedom while we still have it, because there are. And there always will be people like Castro and other leaders who say they're here to help and they're coming here for your benefit, but they have lied just like he did. And unfortunately, some of them are even worse, and they lie and cheat and kill just like he did. I'm not saying these other representatives are like that. I'm just saying these people think they're better than you, and they don't care about you. They clearly don't care about you, regardless of race or color or status or any of those things. They only care about themselves and the power that they maintain. And this does matter. This matters because they're pushing these Marxist, socialist, communist ideas, and these ideas are not interchangeable with the gospel of Jesus. That's why all of this matters. The revolution, the re-revolution that's going on in Cuba right now, this voting shenanigans that's going on, social justice and other things that people are proclaiming is more than or better than the gospel of Jesus is just not. Even the very foundation of Marxism and socialism is anti-Christian. It is anti-Christian. This is the quote that I wanted to read you from Marx. He said, quote, the first requisite of happiness of the people is the abolition of religion. And that comes from a criticism of the Hegelian philosophy of the right. That's 1844. And Hegel came before Marx, who also hated religion and Christianity. I'm not going to talk about that today because I'm getting too long and that's too thick of a topic to get into with all of the philosophy that we've already covered. But I do want to say that Christianity, of course, is all about God. God is the center of Christianity. In the Marxist model, socialist, communist model, the state is the center of your world. The state becomes the provider, the sustainer, the protector, the lawgiver for every person. I have Psalm 23 on my wall. You can't see it, but it's on my wall right here because I look at it all the time. And I look at it because Psalm 23 is one of those great psalms that reminds me that God is my provider, sustainer, protector, lawgiver, lover of my soul. God is the one who is for me. The state, these politicians, they don't care about me. They don't care about you. Christianity always appeals to the authority of God, this God of the universe, Jesus, his son, and the spirit that lives in us. Marxist, socialist, communist governments don't like the idea of there being any authority other than themselves. This is evidently true in every socialist that turned communist place on earth for history, and it will continue to be true. These ideas of Castro that sound like many of the politicians today should terrify you because they sound the same. It is the same thing over and over and over again. A friend of mine the other day said, Satan is not smarter than God. He's just old. He doesn't know more things. He just is older. And so he recycles and reuses the same tricks over and over and over again. And this is the same trick that he is recycling and using again and again. And we, the believers who should know better, need to act like we know better. And where we can, our call is to stand up for truth and justice and protect those who can't protect themselves. This is an important part of Christianity, that we just can't sit alone in our rooms where we've been quarantined. We need to step out and speak the truth, regardless of the cost. And I'll just leave you with this. As Joshua said, the leader of the Israelites after Moses, as he said many years ago, choose this day whom you will serve. In other words, you can read right before that, you have the choice to serve the gods of the world, the gods of this land, or you have the choice to serve the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the living God, Jesus as his Savior. Obviously, Joshua didn't know that at the time, but as for me and my house, Joshua says, we will serve the Lord. I hope that is your cry as well, and I hope that throughout your life, you will serve the Lord and keep the faith.